In quiet Minneapolis suburbs, a 67-year-old widow was about to shatter her family. What started as a peaceful barbecue took a shocking turn when she faced her daughter-in-law's public humiliation. Cora Peterson wasn't your typical retired teacher. For 3 years, she had secretly funded her son's mortgage, known for quiet generosity and unwavering loyalty. When Jessica claimed she, quote, doesn't contribute enough, Cora had no idea she was unleashing devastating consequences. Her decision to stop mortgage payments would trigger a family crisis none saw coming. What began as hidden sacrifice became open warfare. The Petersons would never recover from discovering love's true cost. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of Cora Peterson's kitchen, casting delicate shadows across the stack of bills spread before her on the worn formica table. 3 months had passed since Harold's funeral, and she still expected to hear his shuffling footsteps on the linoleum, still brewed coffee for 2 out of habit. The silence in the small Minneapolis ranch house felt heavier each day, pressing against her chest like a physical weight. She adjusted her reading glasses and picked up her checkbook, the leather cover cracked from decades of use. Harold had given it to her for their 10th anniversary. "So you can manage our empire," he'd joked, gesturing at their modest home and single bank account. Now that empire felt vast and lonely, filled with decisions that echoed in empty rooms. The mortgage payment check came third in her monthly ritual, after the utilities and her own small expenses. David Peterson, she wrote in her careful teacher's script, the amount unchanged for 3 years, $1,847.32. Her son's name felt foreign under her pen, as if she were writing to a stranger rather than the boy who'd once built elaborate Lego cities on this same table. Cora paused, studying her bank balance. The life insurance money Harold had left was substantial, enough to live comfortably for years if she were careful. But careful had taken on new meaning since David lost his job. The number in her account grew smaller each month, not just from her own expenses, but from this secret she carried like a stone in her chest. A memory surfaced unbidden. Harold in his hospital bed, tubes snaking from his arms, his voice hoarse but determined. "Promise me you'll take care of our boy if he needs it. But don't let him lose his pride, Cora. A man needs his pride." She'd promised, of course. What else could she do? But Harold hadn't anticipated how taking care of David would feel like slowly disappearing herself. Each month, she transferred money to his account, telling herself it was temporary. Each month, David mentioned nothing, and neither did she. The phone's sharp ring broke her reverie. David's name appeared on the caller ID, and her heart did its familiar flutter of hope and anxiety. "Hi, Mom." His voice carried the forced cheer she'd learned to recognize, the tone of a man trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Hello, sweetheart. How are Emma and Lucas?" They're good. Emma made honor roll again, and Lucas scored 2 goals in Saturday's game. David's pride was genuine here, untainted by the careful navigation that marked their other conversations. "That's wonderful. You must be so proud." "We are." "Listen, Mom." The pause stretched long enough for Cora to brace herself. "Jessica wanted me to call. She's been talking about family involvement, about the kids needing more connection with their grandparents." Cora's fingers tightened on the phone. Jessica's criticisms always came filtered through David, softened by his conflict avoidance, but sharp enough to draw blood nonetheless. "What kind of involvement?" "Just being around more, I guess. She thinks you're too critical sometimes, not supportive enough of our decisions. She said maybe you'd have more understanding if you contributed more to what we're dealing with day to day." The irony hit her like a physical blow. Contributed more. If only Jessica knew about the check she'd just written, about the dozens that had come before it, about the slowly dwindling account that represented Harold's legacy and her security. "I see," Cora managed, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "It's not that we don't appreciate everything you do," David rushed to add. "It's just, Jessica's under a lot of pressure at work, and she feels like she's handling everything alone sometimes. Everything alone. Cora stared at the check on her table, at David's name written in her careful handwriting. Of course. I understand. But she didn't understand. Not really. How could she explain that her silence wasn't indifference but love? That her distance wasn't judgment, but the careful preservation of her son's dignity? Harold had been right about pride, but he'd underestimated the cost of protecting it. After they hung up, Cora sat in the quiet kitchen, the check growing heavy in her hand. She could picture Jessica in their beautiful suburban home, the home Cora was helping to pay for, frustrated and overwhelmed, unaware that her mother-in-law's greatest contribution was invisible. At 2:00, she drove to David's house for her weekly visit with the grandchildren. Emma, 10 and precocious, greeted her with a fierce hug that reminded Cora why the sacrifice felt worthwhile. Lucas, 7 and gap-toothed, showed off his latest artwork with the unself-conscious joy that made her heart ache with love. But Jessica's greeting was cool, professional. She managed the visit like a business meeting, orchestrating activities and conversations with efficient distance. When Emma mentioned wanting to take piano lessons, Jessica's response was swift. "We'll see what we can afford, honey." Cora bit her tongue, swallowing the offer that rose automatically. She could afford piano lessons. She could afford many things for these children she adored. But Harold's voice echoed in her memory. Don't let him lose his pride. That evening, alone again in her kitchen, Cora made herself a simple dinner and sat at the table where Harold used to read her the newspaper highlights. The house felt smaller each day, as if the walls were slowly closing in on her solitary life. She thought about Jessica's words, filtered through David's careful translation, not supportive enough, too critical, needing to contribute more. The woman who said these things had no idea that Cora had given up her book club, her small luxuries, even her plans for visiting Harold's sister in Arizona, all to keep David's family in their home. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe Harold had been wrong about pride. Maybe there was a difference between protecting someone's dignity and enabling their silence. Maybe her invisible sacrifices had become too invisible, rendering her irrelevant in the very family she was silently sustaining. The mail carrier's late delivery interrupted her brooding. Among the usual bills and advertisements was an envelope with Emma's careful handwriting, Grandma Cora, decorated with hand-drawn flowers. Inside was a crayon drawing of their family and an invitation written in Emma's best cursive. You are invited to our family barbecue on Saturday. Please come. We are grilling hamburgers and hot dogs. Love, Emma and Lucas. At the bottom, in Jessica's efficient print, Saturday, 3 p.m. Hope you can make it. Cora studied the invitation, feeling something shift in her chest. A barbecue. A family gathering where she would sit on the periphery, listening to conversations about decisions she wasn't consulted on, watching her grandchildren play in the yard she was helping to keep safe, surrounded by the comfortable life her monthly checks made possible. The irony was becoming unbearable. She was the invisible foundation holding up their world, yet she felt increasingly like a stranger observing from the outside. Something would have to change. She could feel it building in her chest like pressure in a kettle, threatening to boil over. But for now, she folded the invitation carefully and placed it on her refrigerator, next to Emma's latest school photo. Saturday would come whether she was ready or not. The question was whether she could continue swallowing her truth, or if the time had finally come to let her family see the real cost of their comfort. The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the silence, marking time toward a reckoning she could no longer avoid. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp October weather that made Minneapolis suburbs look like a postcard. Cora drove through David's neighborhood, past the manicured lawns and two-car garages, each house a testament to successful middle-class aspirations. She'd helped Harold pick out this route to their son's house years ago, back when David first bought the place with his aerospace engineering salary and a bright future stretching ahead like an open highway. Now, 3 years later, she knew the route by heart and knew the mortgage payment that kept it possible. The Peterson house sat at the end of Maple Ridge Drive, a colonial revival with sage-green shutters and a front porch that Jessica had decorated with seasonal wreaths and potted mums. Cora could see the backyard already alive with activity, David manning the grill, neighbors clustered around picnic tables, children racing across the grass in the golden afternoon light. She parked behind Rosa Martinez's sedan and took a steadying breath. Jessica's mother had always been cordial to Cora, though their conversations never went deeper than pleasantries about the grandchildren. Rosa understood the delicate balance of being a mother-in-law, the art of being present without being invasive, supportive without being controlling. "Grandma Cora." Lucas's voice carried across the yard as she made her way through the side gate. He launched himself at her with the uninhibited joy of childhood, his grass-stained knees and chocolate-smeared smile, reminding her why she endured the complicated dynamics of family gatherings. "There's my favorite soccer star," she said, returning his fierce hug. "I heard you scored 2 goals last week." "3," he corrected, holding up grubby fingers. "Mom said maybe you didn't hear right." Emma appeared more cautiously, her 10-year-old awareness already tuned to the subtle tensions that shaped family interactions. "Hi, Grandma. Dad's making your favorite burgers. Medium rare, just like Grandpa used to like them." The mention of Harold sent a familiar pang through Cora's chest. These children remembered their grandfather's preferences, carried forward his memory in small ways that their parents might not even notice. It was both comforting and heartbreaking, proof that love persists, but also a reminder of what she'd lost. David waved from the grill, his smile genuine but strained. She'd learned to read the worry lines around his eyes, the set of his shoulders when he was carrying stress he couldn't share. Today he wore both like a heavy coat. "Mom, glad you could make it," he called out, turning burger patties with practiced precision. "Jessica's got the kids organizing some kind of relay race. You know how she gets with her project management skills." Indeed, Jessica was in her element, clipboard in hand, organizing the neighborhood children into teams with the same efficiency she probably brought to her marketing campaigns. She wore white jeans and a navy blazer. Casual but polished, the kind of effortless put-together look that required careful planning. When she spotted Cora, her smile was warm but didn't quite reach her eyes. "Cora, so good to see you. Rosa's been asking about you. She's over by the beverage table." The dismissal was subtle but clear. Jessica had places for everyone, and Cora's place was away from the center of activity. She found Rosa arranging sodas and beer in galvanized tubs filled with ice, her movements efficient and unpretentious. "Cora, hello." Rosa's greeting was warmer than her daughter's, tinged with the understanding of 2 women who'd both learned to navigate the complex territory of loving, difficult adult children. "Beautiful day for this. Jessica's been planning for weeks." They chatted pleasantly about the weather, the children's schools, Rosa's part-time job at the community center. Safe topics that required no emotional investment, no revelation of the undercurrents that shaped their family dynamics. Cora found herself relaxing slightly, remembering what normal conversation felt like. The trouble began, as it often did, with good intentions. Emma had approached during a lull in the relay races, her face flushed with excitement and something else, a child's version of adult worry. "Grandma, Mom, and Dad, we're talking about my piano lessons again. They said we might have to wait until Dad finds a better job." It was an innocent comment, the kind of observation children make without understanding the weight their words carry. But Cora felt her chest tighten as she saw Jessica's head turn sharply from across the yard. "That's between your parents, sweetheart," Cora said gently, but Emma persisted with the stubborn honesty of childhood. "But you used to teach piano, right? Mom said you could probably teach me, but then she said you probably wouldn't want to drive over here that much." The implication hung in the air like smoke from the grill. Jessica had been discussing her, making assumptions about her willingness to be involved, while simultaneously keeping her at arm's length from family decisions. "I'd be happy to teach you piano," Cora said, loud enough for Jessica to hear. "We could even look into getting you a small keyboard to start with, nothing too expensive, just something to learn on." Jessica was walking over now, her project management smile firmly in place. "Emma, honey, why don't you go help Uncle Mike with the horseshoes? Grandma Cora and I need to talk." The adults around them continued their conversations, but Cora sensed the shift in attention, the way people's ears tuned in without their eyes following. David had abandoned the grill to his brother-in-law, positioning himself within intervention distance. Cora, I appreciate the offer, but we've got the piano situation handled, Jessica said, her voice carrying the professional courtesy she probably used with clients. We're looking into group lessons at the community center. More affordable. And Emma would benefit from playing with other children. Of course, Cora replied, though something in Jessica's tone sparked irritation in her chest. I just thought, since I have experience. That's exactly what I mean. Jessica interrupted, and her professional mask slipped slightly, revealing the strain beneath. You always think you have the solution. You always think you know what's best for our family. The conversations around them grew quieter. Rosa had stopped arranging beverages, her dark eyes moving between her daughter and Cora with growing concern. David took a step forward, but Jessica held up a hand to stop him. Jessica, Cora said carefully, I was just offering to help. By spending money we haven't asked you to spend? By making decisions about our children's activities without consulting us? Jessica's voice was rising now, 3 months of work frustration and family pressure finally finding an outlet. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You criticize our choices, you question our decisions, but you don't contribute anything constructive to the conversation. The words hit Cora like physical blows. Around them, the barbecue had grown uncomfortably quiet, neighbors pretending to focus on their food while listening to every word. I'm not trying to criticize. Aren't you? Jessica's control was unraveling now, stress and exhaustion overriding her usual diplomatic approach. Every visit, it's something. The way we discipline the kids, the activities we choose, the schools we've picked. You have opinions about everything, but you don't actually help with anything. David finally found his voice. Jess, maybe we should… No, David, this needs to be said. Jessica turned back to Cora, her eyes bright with unshed tears of frustration. If you want to have input about our family decisions, if you want to criticize how we're raising our children or managing our lives, then you need to contribute more than just opinions. You need to put up or shut up. The phrase landed in the sudden silence like a stone dropped in still water. Cora felt her face flush with humiliation as she became aware of the circle of attention surrounding them. Rosa was staring at her daughter with horror. The neighbor children had stopped playing, sensing the adult tension even if they didn't understand it. Emma and Lucas stood frozen near the horseshoe pit, their faces reflecting confusion and distress. I see, Cora managed, her teacher's training helping her maintain composure even as her heart hammered against her ribs. I didn't realize my presence was such a burden. It's not about being a burden, Jessica said, her voice cracking slightly. It's about respect. If you don't think we're capable of making our own decisions, if you don't trust us to know what's best for our own family, then maybe you shouldn't be so involved in our lives. The irony was suffocating. Standing there in the backyard that her monthly mortgage payments helped secure, surrounded by the comfortable life her sacrifices made possible, being accused of not contributing enough, it was almost absurd enough to laugh at. Almost. Instead, Cora straightened her shoulders and reached for her purse. Thank you for clarifying your feelings. I think it's best if I leave now. Mom, wait. David's voice carried panic now, but she was already walking toward the gate. Tell the children I said goodbye, she said without turning around. And thank you for the lovely party. She made it to her car before the tears started, her hands shaking as she turned the key in the ignition. Behind her, she could hear David's voice raised in what sounded like argument, but she didn't look back. As she drove through the quiet suburban streets, past the houses filled with families enjoying their Saturday afternoon, Cora felt something crystallizing in her chest. The hurt was there, sharp and immediate, but beneath it was something harder, something that felt like decision. Jessica wanted her to contribute or stay silent. She wanted to know what Cora brought to the table. By the time she reached her own driveway, Cora knew exactly what Jessica was about to learn. The house welcomed Cora with its familiar silence, but tonight the quiet felt different, charged with possibility rather than emptiness. She set her purse on the kitchen counter and stood for a moment in the fading light, replaying Jessica's words like a recording she couldn't turn off. You need to contribute more than just opinions. You need to put up or shut up. The phrase had lodged itself in her chest like a splinter, sharp and impossible to ignore. Cora walked to the refrigerator and stared at Emma's barbecue invitation, still hanging there with its cheerful crayon flowers. How naive she'd been, thinking a family gathering could bridge the growing chasm between them. How foolish to believe that her quiet presence was enough, that her love spoke for itself. She made herself a cup of tea, Harold's favorite chamomile blend, and sat at the kitchen table where she'd written that morning's mortgage check. The checkbook lay open, David's name still visible in her careful script. $1,847.32. The number that had defined her relationship with her son's family for 3 years. The secret that made her complicit in their comfortable ignorance. The irony burned like acid in her throat. While Jessica accused her of not contributing, Cora had been quietly funding their entire lifestyle. While David spoke of his wife's stress about money, he'd hidden the fact that his mother was keeping them afloat. While they made decisions about the children's activities and their household expenses, they did so with the security of knowing that the largest bill, the one that kept a roof over their heads, was mysteriously handled each month. Sleep eluded her that night. She lay in the bed she'd shared with Harold for 37 years, staring at the ceiling and listening to the house settle around her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Jessica's face flushed with righteous anger, heard the uncomfortable silence of the other barbecue guests, felt the weight of Emma and Lucas's confused stares. At 3 a.m, she gave up pretending to rest and padded to the kitchen in her robe and slippers. The checkbook seemed to glow in the moonlight streaming through the window, and she found herself calculating. 3 years. 36 payments. Over $66,000 of her life insurance money, her security, Harold's legacy, gone into a black hole of their gratitude. But that wasn't entirely fair, was it? David had never asked her to hide the payments. When he'd first called, desperate and ashamed after losing his job, he'd been honest about his fear of losing the house. She'd offered to help temporarily, and he'd accepted with the promise to pay her back when he got on his feet. The secrecy had been her choice, driven by Harold's dying words about protecting their son's pride. She'd told David to let Jessica believe the bank had approved a modification of their loan terms, a story that became easier to maintain as months turned into years. David's job search had stretched longer than anyone expected, the aerospace industry slow to recover, his skills somehow not matching what employers wanted. But somewhere in those 3 years, the temporary help had become permanent dependence, and the secret had become a barrier between her and the family she was supporting. She'd become invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of their lives while her money spoke louder than her presence ever could. By dawn, Cora had made her decision. She waited until 8 o'clock, a reasonable hour for business calls, and dialed the number printed on her checking account statements. After navigating through automated prompts and waiting on hold for 12 minutes, she finally reached a customer service representative named Brandon, whose cheerful voice made her task feel surreal. "I need to stop an automatic payment," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was doing. "It goes out on the 15th of each month." "Certainly, Mrs. Peterson. I can help you with that. Can you verify the account information and the amount of the automatic payment?" The questions were routine, administrative, but each answer felt like a step off a cliff. Account number, routing number, payment amount, the mechanical process of dismantling 3 years of sacrifice. "And you want this to stop immediately?" Brandon asked. "Yes. Cancel any future automatic payments to that account." "I show your next scheduled payment would be in 6 days. Just to confirm, you want me to cancel that payment and all subsequent ones?" "That's correct." "Okay, Mrs. Peterson, I've canceled the automatic payment setup. You'll receive a confirmation email within 24 hours. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" "No, thank you. That's everything." She hung up and sat in the sudden quiet of her kitchen, staring at the phone as if it might ring back and undo what she'd just done. The deed was done. Irreversible. In 6 days, David's mortgage payment would bounce, and the careful fiction they'd all been living would crumble. But she wasn't finished. Cora pulled out her goods stationery, cream-colored paper with her name embossed at the top, a Christmas gift from Harold the year before he died. She'd used it for thank you notes and sympathy cards, never imagining she'd need it for something like this. The first draft was angry, filled with 3 years of accumulated resentment, and the fresh sting of Jessica's public humiliation. She wrote about sacrifice and ingratitude, about the mortgage payments that had kept their house safe and the thanks she'd never received. She wrote about being called useless by a woman whose life she was subsidizing, about being dismissed by a son who owed his stability to her silence. She tore it up and started again. The second version was cold, clinical. A simple notification that she was discontinuing financial support, effective immediately. No explanation, no emotion, just the facts delivered with the same detachment Jessica had shown when she demanded Cora, put up or shut up. That one joined the first in the wastebasket. The third attempt came from a deeper place, the part of her that was more tired than angry, more disappointed than furious. She wrote about love that had been taken for granted, about the loneliness of making sacrifices that couldn't be acknowledged. She wrote about Harold's dying wish to protect their son's pride, and how that protection had somehow made her complicit in her own erasure. By noon, she had filled 6 pages with careful handwriting, pouring out years of unspoken feelings. But when she read it back, it felt like bleeding on paper. Too raw, too needy, too much like begging for the understanding she'd never received. She was starting her 4th attempt when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she could see Frank Morrison's familiar figure, his tool belt replaced by weekend clothes, and a concerned expression. Frank had been Harold's closest friend, the kind of man who showed up without calling when he sensed trouble. At 72, he still moved like the contractor he'd been for 40 years, his handshake firm and his manner direct. He'd lost his wife Martha 2 years before Harold, and their shared widowhood had created a quiet understanding between them. "Cora," he said when she opened the door, "you look like hell." "Good morning to you too, Frank." Despite everything, she found herself almost smiling. Frank's bluntness was one of his most endearing qualities, and one of his most challenging. "David called me this morning. Said there was some kind of dust-up at the barbecue yesterday, and you left upset." Frank studied her face with the attention he'd once given to building blueprints. "He's worried about you." "Is he worried about me or worried about what I might do?" Frank's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's an interesting distinction. Mind if I come in? Whatever you're thinking about doing. Maybe we should talk it through first." She led him to the kitchen, where her abandoned letter attempt lay on the table next to the checkbook. Frank's eyes took in the scene, the scattered pages, the tired look on her face, the weight of decision hanging in the air. "Coffee?" she offered, but he shook his head. "Cora, I've known you for 25 years. I watched you teach high school kids who thought they were too tough to learn math, and somehow you got through to them. I watched you take care of Harold during those last months, and I never once heard you complain about how hard it was." Frank sat down across from her, his weathered hands folded on the table. "But I'm worried about you now. Really worried. Jessica thinks I don't contribute enough to their family," Cora said, the words coming out harder than she'd intended. "She thinks I'm all opinions and no action. And you're about to prove her wrong." It wasn't a question. Frank had always been perceptive, able to read situations the way he'd once read load-bearing walls and structural problems. She found herself nodding, acknowledging what she hadn't yet spoken aloud. "How long have you been helping them with the mortgage?" The question surprised her. She'd assumed David would keep that secret even from Frank, but maybe desperation had a way of breaking down barriers. 3 years. Since David lost his job. Frank was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "And Jessica doesn't know. David thought it was better that way. Pride, you know. Harold always said a man needs his pride. Harold was a good man, but he wasn't always right." Frank's voice carried the gentle authority of someone who'd earned the right to speak hard truths, and using a dead man's words to justify keeping secrets from your family. "Well, that's not like you, Cora." She felt her defensiveness rise. "I was helping them. I was keeping their home safe. You were keeping them dependent, and yourself invisible." Frank leaned forward, his blue eyes serious. "I'm not saying your motives were wrong, but the way you went about it, that created the situation you're in now." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The truth of his words hit her like cold water. She had made choices that led to this moment. Decisions that had seemed right at the time but had created their own problems. The secret payments hadn't just protected David's pride, They'd protected her from having to confront Jessica's resentment, from having to assert her place in the family, from having to risk rejection. "So what do you think I should do?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear his answer. Frank was quiet for a moment, studying the letter fragments on her table. "I think you should call David and tell him what you've done. Give him a chance to figure out how to handle this with Jessica before the first payment bounces. And if he can't handle it, if Jessica just sees this as proof that I was manipulating them all along, then at least you'll know where you stand. And maybe that's what you really need, the truth, even if it's not comfortable." Cora looked at her hands, thinking about the phone call she'd made that morning, the automatic payment she'd canceled, the chain of events she'd set in motion. "I already called the bank. The next payment won't go through." Frank's expression didn't change, but she saw him absorb this information. How long before they notice? 6 days until the payment would have been due, maybe a few more days before the bank sends notices. "So we've got maybe a week before this becomes a crisis." Frank stood up, his decision made. "I think you should tell David today. Give him time to prepare Jessica, to figure out their finances, to decide how they want to handle this." "And if I don't want to tell him? If I want him to figure it out the same way I had to figure out that my presence wasn't welcome at family gatherings?" Frank studied her for a long moment, and she saw something like disappointment in his eyes. "Then you're not the woman I thought you were. The Cora Peterson I know wouldn't use innocent children as pawns in her fight with their mother." The words stung because they carried truth. Emma and Lucas would be the ones most affected if their parents couldn't find a way to make the mortgage payments. They were the ones who would face the disruption of losing their home, changing schools, upheaval in their young lives. But they were also the ones Jessica claimed to be protecting when she insisted Cora shouldn't have input about their activities or their futures. If Jessica wanted to make parenting decisions without input from Cora, then perhaps she should also make financial decisions without support from her. "I'm not trying to hurt the children," Cora said finally. "I'm trying to make their parents understand what my contributions actually mean. And what if they can't make the payments? What if David can't find the money somewhere else?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Cora had been so focused on teaching a lesson, on forcing acknowledgement of her sacrifices, that she hadn't fully considered the practical consequences. What if her withdrawal of support destroyed the very family she was trying to reconnect with? But then she thought about Jessica's face at the barbecue, the contempt in her voice when she dismissed Cora's offer to help with Emma's piano lessons. She thought about 3 years of careful silence while her bank account diminished and her role in the family shrank to irrelevance. "Then they'll learn what my contributions were worth," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Frank looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. But Cora, when this blows up, and it will blow up, don't say I didn't warn you. Family disasters have a way of spreading farther than you expect." After Frank left, Cora returned to her letter. This time, she kept it simple. "Dear David, after yesterday's conversation with Jessica, I've realized that my contributions to your family have been misunderstood. Since Jessica feels that I don't contribute enough to have opinions about your family decisions, I've decided to stop contributing financially as well. Effective immediately, I have canceled the automatic mortgage payment I've been making for the past 3 years. I believe this will help clarify exactly what my contributions have meant to your family's stability. I hope you can find alternative arrangements for your housing expenses. If Jessica is correct that my input isn't valuable, then perhaps my financial support isn't necessary either. Love, Mom." She sealed the letter in an envelope and walked to the mailbox at the end of her street. The afternoon was crisp and clear, the kind of fall day she and Harold used to spend raking leaves and planning their winter projects. The normalcy of the neighborhood around her, children playing, neighbors working in their yards, the peaceful rhythm of suburban Saturday afternoon, made her actions feel both momentous and surreal. She stood at the mailbox for a full minute, the letter heavy in her hand. Once she dropped it in, there would be no taking it back. The careful balance they'd all maintained for 3 years would be shattered, and she had no idea what would take its place. Frank's words echoed in her mind. Family disasters have a way of spreading farther than you expect, but Jessica's words were louder. You need to put up or shut up. Cora opened the mailbox and dropped the letter inside. The metal door clanged shut with the finality of a closing chapter. As she walked back to her house, she realized she felt lighter than she had in months. For the first time in 3 years, she was telling the truth about her situation. Whatever came next, at least it would be honest. The silence of her empty house welcomed her back, but this time it felt like possibility rather than loneliness. She had no idea what David and Jessica would do when they learned the truth. No idea whether this revelation would bring them together or drive them further apart. But for the first time in 3 years, Cora Peterson was no longer invisible. The drive to Cora's house felt both endless and impossibly short. Jessica sat rigid in the passenger seat, her hands clenched in her lap, alternating between rehearsing apologies and formulating arguments for why Cora's decision was cruel to the grandchildren. David gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, his mind spinning through 3 years of deception, trying to find words that could somehow make this catastrophe comprehensible. They'd driven this route hundreds of times, for birthday dinners, holiday gatherings, casual Sunday visits when the children were smaller and family relationships felt simpler. Now the familiar streets seemed alien, leading them not to family comfort, but to a confrontation that would determine whether they still had a family at all. Cora's house looked smaller than David remembered, the modest ranch dwarfed by the weight of what they'd come to ask. Her car was in the driveway, and the living room curtains were drawn, signs of life that made Jessica's shoulders tense with anticipation. "What do we say?" David asked as they sat in the driveway, engine idling. "We tell the truth. We apologize. We beg if we have to." Jessica's voice was steady, but David could see the tremor in her hands. "We save our children's home." The walk to the front door felt like approaching a judge's bench. David raised his hand to knock, then hesitated, suddenly aware that this might be the most important conversation of his adult life. Everything they'd built together, their marriage, their family, their sense of security, hung in the balance of whatever happened in the next hour. Before he could knock, the door opened. Cora stood in the doorway, and David was struck by how different she looked. Not smaller or more fragile, as he'd expected, but somehow more solid, more present. The perpetual apology that had shadowed her expressions for years was gone, replaced by something that looked remarkably like resolve. "I wondered when you'd come," she said, her voice neutral but not unkind. "Mom, we need to talk." David's voice cracked slightly on the words. "I imagine you do." Cora stepped aside, gesturing them into the living room where David had spent countless childhood hours. The space felt different now, less like the sanctuary of maternal comfort he remembered, more like the territory of someone who'd made peace with difficult decisions. Jessica entered last, her usual confidence replaced by something David had rarely seen in his wife: uncertainty. She looked around the modest room with fresh eyes, taking in details she'd never noticed before. The careful way Cora had arranged her furniture to maximize the small space, the absence of luxury items that might have made her own life easier, the framed photos of Emma and Lucas that occupied places of honor on every shelf. "Mrs. Peterson," Jessica began, then stopped, the formal address feeling wrong after 8 years of family relationship. "Cora, we came to apologize." "For what, specifically?" Cora settled into Harold's old recliner, her posture upright and alert. She wasn't going to make this easy. "For what I said at the barbecue. For the way I spoke to you." Jessica's professional composure was cracking, revealing the raw emotion beneath. "I didn't know. About the mortgage payments. About what you'd been doing for us." "No, you didn't know. Because my son chose not to tell you." Cora's gaze moved to David, and he felt the weight of 3 years of deception pressing down on him. "Just as you chose not to ask where the money was coming from when your household budget didn't match your expenses." The observation was surgical in its precision. Jessica flinched, recognizing the truth in it. She had chosen not to examine too closely how they managed to afford their lifestyle on David's unemployment benefits and her salary. Some part of her had always known the numbers didn't quite add up, but she'd been content to let David handle the details as long as the bills got paid. "We should have been honest from the beginning," David said, finding his voice. I should have told Jessica what you were doing for us. Should have made sure she knew how much you were helping. Yes, you should have. Cora's tone was matter of fact, without the heat of anger but carrying the weight of accumulated disappointment. But you chose Harold's pride over honest communication, and now we're all living with the consequences of that choice. Quote, Frank Morrison's voice carried from the kitchen before any of them could respond. Coffee's ready if anyone wants some. David turned, startled. He hadn't seen Frank's truck in the driveway, hadn't expected his mother to have company during this confrontation. Frank's been helping me think through some things, Cora explained, as if reading his thoughts. I find his perspective valuable when making important decisions. Frank appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray with 4 cups and a pot of coffee. His presence changed the dynamic in the room, adding an element of witnessed accountability that made David's skin prickle with discomfort. Frank? Jessica nodded acknowledgement, accepting a cup of coffee she clearly didn't want. Jessica, David. Frank's greeting was polite but cool. Hell of a situation you've all found yourselves in. Frank? Cora's voice carried a gentle warning. What? It is a hell of a situation. 3 years of secrets and hurt feelings, and now everyone wants to fix it in one conversation. Frank settled into a corner chair, clearly intending to stay for whatever came next. Sometimes you have to sit in the mess for a while before you can see how to clean it up. Jessica set her coffee cup down with more force than necessary. We didn't come here to be lectured. We came to make things right. And how do you propose to do that? Cora asked. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jessica looked to David, who looked at his hands, leaving her to navigate the treacherous territory of their family's financial reality. We want to work out a payment plan. Jessica said finally, some way to pay you back for what you've given us, and some arrangement for going forward that works for everyone. With what money? Cora's question was gentle but relentless. David's still unemployed. Your salary, while decent, was never enough to cover your mortgage on its own. What's changed since yesterday that would make a payment plan possible? I'll find another job. I'll take anything. David's voice was desperate now, the sound of a man watching his world crumble. Construction, retail, whatever it takes. I'll work 2 jobs if I have to. You've been looking for 3 years, Frank observed. What makes you think tomorrow's going to be different than today? The brutal practicality of the question silenced David. He'd been sending out resumes and going to interviews for 36 months, watching his confidence erode with each rejection, each overqualification notice, each company that wanted younger candidates or different skills. Maybe we could refinance, Jessica suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. Or get a second mortgage on the equity we've built up. What equity? Cora's question was soft but devastating. You haven't built equity, Jessica. I've built equity. Every payment that's gone toward principal has come from my account. The house has appreciated, yes, but the financial investment that created that appreciation was mine. The legal and emotional implications of this reality seemed to hit Jessica all at once. Her face went pale as she realized that her family's security wasn't just dependent on Cora's ongoing generosity, it was built entirely on Cora's financial foundation. You're saying the house isn't really ours? Jessica whispered. I'm saying the house is yours as long as someone pays the mortgage. But that someone has been me, not you. Cora leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on the patient tone David remembered from his childhood, when she'd helped him work through difficult math problems. The question now is whether I'm going to continue making that choice. And what would it take? David asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. For you to continue helping us, what would it take? Cora was quiet for a long moment, her eyes moving between her son and daughter-in-law, settling finally on Jessica. Respect, she said simply. Recognition that my contributions matter. Acknowledgement that my opinions have value, because they come from someone who loves this family enough to sacrifice for it. You want us to be grateful, Jessica said, and there was an edge to her voice that made David's stomach clench. I want you to be honest. With me, with each other, with yourselves, about what this relationship actually is. Cora's composure never wavered. For 3 years, you've been able to make decisions about your lives, your children, your future. Because I've provided the financial foundation that made those choices possible. But I've been treated like an outsider, someone whose input isn't welcome, whose presence is tolerated rather than valued. That's not. Jessica started, then stopped. Because it was true. She had treated Cora like an obligation rather than an asset, a complication rather than a blessing. I don't want gratitude for its own sake, Cora continued. I want partnership. I want to be included in decisions that affect children I love, in a family I've been supporting. I want the contribution I make to be acknowledged and valued, not hidden away like something shameful. Frank cleared his throat. Seems reasonable to me. It's not that simple, Jessica said, her professional instincts kicking in. We can't just restructure our entire family dynamic overnight. There are boundaries. There are considerations. What considerations? Cora asked. Jessica struggled to articulate what she was feeling. The fear of losing autonomy, the terror of being judged as inadequate, the deep-seated need to prove she could manage her own family without interference. But under Cora's steady gaze, those concerns seemed smaller, more selfish than she'd imagined. I need to know that you won't use this against us, Jessica said finally, that helping us financially won't become a weapon when we disagree about something. The way you used my supposed lack of contribution as a weapon at the barbecue? Cora's question was pointed but not cruel. Jessica felt tears prick her eyes. That was different. I was frustrated, overwhelmed, and I didn't know. And I'm not asking for the power to override your parenting decisions or control your lives, Cora said. I'm asking to be treated like a family member whose contributions are valued, whose input is welcome, whose presence is appreciated rather than endured. The room fell quiet except for the ticking of Harold's old mantel clock. David looked between the two most important women in his life, seeing for the first time how his cowardice had created an impossible situation for both of them. I need time, Jessica said finally, to think about what this means, what we can realistically commit to. The children will be home from school soon, and they're going to have questions about why we're both upset, why Daddy's been making phone calls all day. Time is something we don't have much of, Frank observed. Banks don't wait for family therapy sessions. How long? Cora asked. How long before you need an answer about the mortgage? David pulled the bank notice from his pocket, the paper wrinkled from his nervous handling. We're already past due. They'll probably give us a grace period, maybe 2 weeks before they start more serious collection efforts. Then you have 2 weeks to decide what kind of family you want to be, Cora said, rising from her chair. Whether you want to continue living with secrets and resentments, or whether you want to try building something honest. Jessica stood as well, her face a mask of controlled emotion. And if we can't find a way to make this work, then you'll have to figure out your housing situation another way. Cora's voice was steady, but David could see the pain in her eyes. Because I won't go back to being invisible in my own family's life. As they prepared to leave, Frank walked them to the door. For what it's worth, he said quietly. She's not trying to hurt you. She's trying to save herself from disappearing completely. The drive home was silent, both of them processing the impossibility of their situation. They had 2 weeks to rebuild relationships that had been damaged by years of secrets, to find financial solutions that didn't exist, to explain to their children why their world might be about to change dramatically. As they pulled into their driveway, David saw Emma's face appear in the front window, bright, with the innocent expectation that her parents could fix any problem, solve any crisis. The weight of potentially disappointing that trust felt heavier than any mortgage payment. Inside, their house waited with its familiar comforts and its new fragility. Every room now carried the question of whether they would still be living there in a month, whether the security they'd built their lives around had been real or just an elaborate illusion. The children's voices carried from the kitchen, chattering about school and friends and the simple concerns of childhood. For now, at least, their world was still intact. But David and Jessica both knew that their 2 weeks had already begun. The children's laughter from the kitchen felt like mockery as David and Jessica sat in their car, neither moving to go inside. Through the window, they could see Emma helping Lucas with what looked like homework, their heads bent together over worksheets spread across the kitchen table. The normalcy of the scene, backpacks dropped by the door, juice boxes and graham crackers scattered around, seemed to exist in a different universe from the one they'd just left. "We have to tell them something," Jessica said finally, her voice hollow. "Not tonight. Let them have one more normal evening." But even as David said it, he knew that normalcy was already slipping away from them like water through their fingers. The first week passed in a blur of desperate activity and carefully maintained facades. Jessica threw herself into work with manic intensity, staying late every night to chase new accounts and pitch additional projects to existing clients. She researched refinancing options during her lunch breaks, applied for personal loans online, and called every financial institution in the Twin Cities metro area. Each rejection felt like a door slamming shut. Too risky without David's income, insufficient equity for a second mortgage, credit score good but not exceptional. Over and over, the same message. They were exactly the kind of borrowers banks had learned to avoid after the housing crisis. David's job search took on a frantic quality that bordered on self-destruction. He applied for positions he was overqualified for, and jobs he had no business seeking. Construction foreman despite never working construction. Retail manager despite having no retail experience. Insurance adjuster. Car salesman. Anything that posted a salary remotely close to what they needed. The interviews were exercises in humiliation. Potential employers looked at his resume with confusion, trying to understand why an aerospace engineer was applying to manage a big-box electronics store. His explanations, family responsibilities, career change, wanting new challenges, sounded hollow even to himself. "We'll be in touch," became the phrase that haunted his dreams. At home, they tried to maintain the illusion that everything was normal. Jessica still helped Emma with her science projects and attended Lucas's soccer practices. David still read bedtime stories and checked math homework. But the children were perceptive in the way kids always are, sensing the undercurrents of tension that their parents thought they were hiding. Emma started having trouble sleeping. She would appear in the hallway at 11, midnight, sometimes later, claiming bad dreams or stomachaches. When Jessica would tuck her back into bed, Emma would ask careful questions. "Is Daddy going to find a new job soon? Are we going to move? Why doesn't Grandma Cora visit anymore?" The questions were like needles, pricking holes in the careful balloon of normalcy they were trying to maintain. Lucas became defiant in ways that were unlike his usually easygoing personality. He refused to clean his room, fought with Emma over television channels, and had his first ever incident at school, pushing another boy during recess and earning a call from the principal. He says the other kids were teasing him. Mrs. Rodriguez explained during the phone call that interrupted Jessica's frantic afternoon of calling mortgage brokers. Something about his family not having enough money for soccer cleats. "I'm not sure where that came from, but children often pick up on stress at home and express it in unexpected ways." Jessica felt her heart sink. Somehow, despite their efforts, their financial crisis was leaking into their children's social lives. 7-year-olds didn't worry about soccer cleats unless they'd overheard adult conversations about money, about not being able to afford things, about their world becoming less secure. The second missed mortgage payment triggered a cascade of consequences that felt like dominoes falling in slow motion. The bank's second notice arrived on a Friday, this one carrying escalated language about potential foreclosure proceedings and the need to contact their loss mitigation department immediately. David called the number with shaking hands, spending 45 minutes navigating automated systems before reaching a human being who spoke in the neutral, professional tone of someone who delivered bad news for a living. "Mr. Peterson, I see that you've missed 2 payments now, totaling $36.94.64 with late fees. We need to discuss your options for bringing the loan current. We're working on a solution. I'm expecting to hear back about a job next week, and my wife is exploring additional income opportunities." "I understand, sir, but we need concrete action rather than potential solutions. Have you considered a loan modification? We might be able to adjust your payment terms if you can demonstrate financial hardship." The irony was bitter. They could certainly demonstrate financial hardship. They just couldn't demonstrate income sufficient to support any modified payment plan. What would that process involve? You'd need to provide detailed financial documentation going back 2 years. Income statements, tax returns, bank records, proof of assets. We'd need to see the complete picture of your financial situation. David's mouth went dry. A complete financial picture would reveal the mysterious mortgage payments that had been appearing in their account for 3 years, the ones that had allegedly come from loan modifications that had never actually existed. It would expose the entire architecture of lies he'd built to protect Jessica from knowing about his mother's help. I'll need to discuss this with my wife and get back to you. Mr. Peterson, I need to advise you that we're required to begin foreclosure proceedings 30 days after the second missed payment. That gives you approximately 2 weeks to either bring the loan current or enter into a formal modification agreement. 2 weeks. The same timeline his mother had given them, now echoed by the bank's bureaucratic machinery. Jessica's attempts to increase their income took on increasingly desperate dimensions. She pitched herself for freelance marketing projects, offered to work weekends and holidays for additional pay, even explored selling their second car to free up the monthly payment. But the math remained stubbornly unforgiving. Her salary, generous by most standards, simply hadn't been designed to carry a mortgage payment that had assumed dual professional incomes. On a particularly low evening, she found herself considering options that would have been unthinkable 2 weeks earlier. Moving in with her mother Rosa, relocating to a cheaper city where David's engineering skills might be more in demand, pulling Emma and Lucas out of their schools, away from their friends, disrupting their lives to accommodate the financial reality their parents had been avoiding. The thought of calling her mother for help made Jessica's skin crawl with shame. Rosa had worked 2 jobs to put Jessica through college, had sacrificed her own comfort to give her daughter opportunities she'd never had. To now admit that she needed that same kind of help, that despite her education and career success, she couldn't manage to keep her family housed, it felt like a betrayal of everything her mother had worked for. But pride was becoming a luxury they couldn't afford. The children's questions became more direct as the second week wore on. Emma, with her 10-year-old intelligence and anxiety-sharpened perceptions, began asking pointed questions that revealed how much she'd overheard. "Mom, are we poor now?" Jessica looked up from her laptop, where she'd been reviewing their bank account for the 3rd time that day, trying to find money that simply wasn't there. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" "I heard you and Daddy talking about the house payment, and Mrs. Henderson next door asked if we were thinking about moving because she heard." Emma trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with whatever neighborhood gossip she'd encountered. The realization that their financial crisis had become neighborhood speculation made Jessica feel physically sick. In their suburban community, where property values and school districts define social standing, being unable to afford your mortgage was the kind of failure that marked you as fundamentally different from your neighbors. "We're working through some challenges right now," Jessica said carefully, "but that doesn't mean we're poor. It just means we need to make some adjustments." "What kind of adjustments?" "We might need to find a different house. Something more suitable for our family's needs right now." Emma's face crumpled slightly. "I don't want to move. All my friends are here. My school is here." "What about Lucas's soccer team?" Each question felt like another nail in the coffin of Jessica's confidence as a parent. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that adult pride and poor decisions have consequences that children have to live with? How do you tell your daughter that the stability she's counted on was built on a foundation of lies? Lucas's acting out escalated to the point where they received a second call from school. This time, he'd had what his teacher described as a meltdown during math class, crying and insisting that numbers were stupid and didn't work right anyway. When David picked him up early, Lucas was quiet in the car until they were almost home. "Daddy, why doesn't Grandma Cora come over anymore?" The question caught David off guard. In the chaos of the past 2 weeks, he'd almost forgotten that the children would notice their grandmother's absence from their weekly routine. We had a disagreement." Adults sometimes have disagreements, and they need time to work things out. "Did we do something wrong?" The innocence of the question broke David's heart. "Nobody. You and Emma didn't do anything wrong. This is an adult problem." "But she loves us, right? Even when adults have disagreements?" She loves you and Emma very much. More than you could ever know." It was true, and saying it out loud made David realize how completely he'd failed everyone in his life. His mother loved his children enough to sacrifice her financial security for them, and he'd let Jessica publicly humiliate her. Jessica worked tirelessly to provide for their family, and he'd built their life on lies that made her efforts meaningless. His children trusted him to keep their world stable, and he'd created a situation where they might lose their home because of his cowardice. Rosa's involvement began gradually, the way a concerned grandmother might naturally increase her presence when she sensed family stress. She started picking Emma up from school more often, claiming she enjoyed the company. She volunteered to take Lucas to soccer practice, saying it gave her something to do on Saturday mornings. But Jessica recognized the signs of her mother's deeper concern. The way Rosa's eyes lingered on the kitchen table covered with financial documents, the careful way she asked about David's job search, the subtle increase in her presence during what should have been family time. The conversation Jessica had been dreading finally happened on a Thursday evening when Rosa stayed for dinner. The children were upstairs doing homework, and the adults were cleaning up the kitchen in the kind of companionable silence that had defined Jessica and her mother's relationship for years. "Mia," Rosa said quietly, using the Spanish endearment she'd reserved for serious conversations since Jessica was small. "What's really going on?" Jessica's hands stilled on the dish she'd been washing. In the window's reflection, she could see her mother's face, concerned, patient, ready for whatever truth was coming. "We're in trouble, Mama." "I know. The question is, what kind of trouble, and what can we do about it?" The relief of finally being honest was almost overwhelming. Jessica turned around, leaning against the sink, and told her mother everything. The lost job, the secret mortgage payments, the confrontation at the barbecue, Cora's ultimatum, the mounting bank notices, the impossible timeline they were facing. Rosa listened without interrupting, her face cycling through surprise, understanding, and finally, a kind of resigned recognition that made Jessica wonder what her mother had already suspected. "And Cora wants what, exactly? For you to apologize? She wants to be treated like family. She wants her contributions to be acknowledged, and her opinions to be valued." Jessica's voice carried the exhaustion of 2 weeks spent fighting an unwinnable battle. "She wants things I'm not sure I know how to give." Rosa was quiet for a long moment, drying a plate with careful attention to detail. "Your pride," she said finally, "is going to cost your children their home." The words were gentle but devastating. Jessica had been so focused on the impossibility of accepting help, on maintaining her independence, on proving she could manage her own family, that she'd lost sight of what was actually at stake. "I know." Then the question becomes, what are you going to do about it? That night, after Rosa had gone home and the children were finally asleep, Jessica sat at her kitchen table surrounded by bank notices and job applications and financial documents that told the story of their failure. David was upstairs, probably staring at the ceiling and wrestling with the same impossible equations that had been consuming them both. They had less than a week left before the bank's deadline. David's job prospects remained non-existent. Their refinancing options had been exhausted. Their savings account held barely enough to cover groceries for the next 2 weeks. The only solution to their crisis was the one Jessica had been trying to avoid: swallowing her pride, admitting her mistakes, and asking Cora Peterson for forgiveness and continued help. But even that would require more than just apology. It would require the kind of fundamental change in family dynamics that Jessica wasn't sure she was capable of making. It would mean acknowledging that her independence had been an illusion, that her strength as a mother and wife had been subsidized by the woman she'd publicly dismissed. As she gathered the financial documents spread across her table, Jessica realized that Rosa was right. Her pride was indeed about to cost her children their home, unless she could find the courage to set it aside before it was too late. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked past midnight, marking another day lost in their dwindling timeline. Somewhere across the city, Cora Peterson was probably lying awake too, wondering whether the family she'd sacrificed for would choose their pride over their children's stability. In 5 days, they would all have their answer. Rosa Martinez had never been one to let sleeping dogs lie, especially when those dogs were threatening her grandchildren's security. She'd spent Thursday night thinking about Jessica's confession, turning over the layers of pride and pain that had brought two families to this breaking point. By Friday morning, she'd made her decision. She didn't tell Jessica about her plans. Her daughter would have objected, would have wanted to manage the situation herself, would have seen Rosa's intervention as another sign of her own failure to handle adult responsibilities. But Rosa had learned something in her 63 years that Jessica hadn't quite grasped yet. Sometimes love required bypassing pride entirely. Cora Peterson's address wasn't difficult to find. Rosa had been to the house once before, years ago, for Emma's birthday party, when the children were younger and family dynamics less complicated. She remembered it as a modest place, well-kept but unremarkable, the kind of home that spoke of careful budgeting and practical priorities. As she pulled into the driveway Friday afternoon, Rosa was struck by how quiet the neighborhood felt. Tree-lined streets, small front yards, the settled feeling of people who'd lived in their homes for decades rather than years. It was a place for teachers and civil servants and retirees, people who'd built their lives on steady work and modest expectations. Rosa had dressed carefully for this visit, choosing clothes that were respectful but not formal, approachable but not presumptuous. She understood the delicate balance required for uninvited conversations about family failures. Cora answered the door with the wary expression of someone who'd learned not to trust unexpected visitors. Her face showed surprise when she recognized Rosa, followed quickly by a guarded politeness that suggested she was prepared for another difficult conversation. "Rosa, this is unexpected. Mrs. Peterson, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I was hoping we could talk." Cora studied her for a moment, and Rosa could see the internal calculation taking place. Whether this visit represented another attempt at manipulation, whether Jessica had sent her mother to plead their case, whether opening the door would lead to more heartache. About what? About our children. And our grandchildren. And how sometimes the people who love them most can hurt them the most. Something in Rosa's tone seemed to reach Cora, because she stepped aside and gestured toward the living room. "Would you like coffee?" "That would be nice, thank you." The house felt lived in and comfortable, filled with the kind of furniture that had been chosen for durability rather than style. Family photos covered most available surfaces. David at various ages, wedding pictures, and what looked like every school photo Emma and Lucas had ever taken. Rosa noticed how prominent the grandchildren's pictures were, how much space they occupied in Cora's careful arrangement of memories. Cora returned with coffee and settled into what was clearly her usual chair, a recliner position to catch the afternoon light from the front window. "How are Emma and Lucas handling all this?" she asked without preamble. The question caught Rosa off guard with its directness. "They're scared. They don't understand what's happening, but they can feel it. Emma's having nightmares, and Lucas got in trouble at school for the first time in his life." Rosa watched Cora's face tighten with pain at this information. Whatever anger she felt toward David and Jessica, it clearly didn't extend to the children. "They shouldn't be paying for adult mistakes," Cora said quietly. "No, they shouldn't, but they are." Rosa leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on the gentle authority she'd used when Jessica was small and needed guidance rather than lectures. "The question is whether the adults in their lives are going to keep making those mistakes, or whether we're going to figure out how to do better. I'm not the one who created this situation." "Aren't you?" Rosa's question was gentle but pointed. "I don't mean the financial crisis. That's on David and Jessica. But the way it's playing out now, with those children caught in the middle, we all have choices to make about that." Cora set her coffee cup down with careful precision, a gesture Rosa recognized as buying time to formulate a response. "What did Jessica tell you?" "Everything, I think. The mortgage payments you've been making. The barbecue argument. David's lies about the loan modification. Your decision to stop helping." Rosa paused, choosing her words carefully. "She also told me how ashamed she is, how much she wishes she could take back what she said to you." Shame isn't the same as understanding. No, it's not. But it's a start. Rosa looked around the room again, taking in the careful way Cora had created comfort within modest means. You know, I worked 3 jobs when Jessica was in college. Cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves at a grocery store on weekends, and doing alterations for a dry cleaner during the day. That must have been difficult. It was exhausting. But you know what was harder? Rosa met Cora's eyes. Watching my daughter graduate with honors and get her first real job, and hearing her tell people how proud she was that she'd made it on her own, how she'd earned everything through hard work and determination. Cora's expression shifted slightly, recognizing the parallel Rosa was drawing. She wasn't lying, Rosa continued. She did work hard. She did earn her success. But she also had a foundation she didn't acknowledge, support she took for granted because it had always been there. How did you handle it? Badly at first. I was hurt, angry that my sacrifices were invisible. I wanted credit, wanted recognition, wanted her to understand what I'd given up for her opportunities. Rosa smiled ruefully. I had some very righteous conversations with myself about ungrateful children. And then I realized that my goal had never been to create a daughter who felt indebted to me. My goal was to create a daughter who felt capable and confident and strong. If I'd succeeded so well that she felt independent, maybe that was actually what I'd been working toward all along. The observation hung between them, and Rosa could see Cora processing it, testing it against her own relationship with David and Jessica. That's very philosophical, Cora said finally. But philosophy doesn't change the fact that I've been taken for granted, dismissed, treated like my contributions don't matter. You're right. It doesn't change that. Rosa leaned back in her chair, settling in for the longer conversation she sensed they needed. But maybe the question isn't whether they've failed to appreciate you properly. Maybe the question is whether punishing them is going to get you what you actually want. And what do you think I actually want? The same thing I wanted when Jessica was dismissing my sacrifices. The same thing every parent wants. Rosa's voice was gentle but certain. You want to matter to your family. You want your love to be valued. You want to belong, not just be tolerated. Would you like coffee? That would be nice, thank you. The house felt lived in and comfortable, filled with the kind of furniture that had been chosen for durability rather than style. Family photos covered most available surfaces. David at various ages, wedding pictures, and what looked like every school photo Emma and Lucas had ever taken. Rosa noticed how prominent the grandchildren's pictures were, how much space they occupied in Cora's careful arrangement of memories. Cora returned with coffee and settled into what was clearly her usual chair, a recliner position to catch the afternoon light from the front window. How are Emma and Lucas handling all this? She asked without preamble. The question caught Rosa off guard with its directness. They're scared. They don't understand what's happening, but they can feel it. Emma's having nightmares, and Lucas got in trouble at school for the first time in his life. Rosa watched Cora's face tighten with pain at this information. Whatever anger she felt toward David and Jessica, it clearly didn't extend to the children. They shouldn't be paying for adult mistakes, Cora said quietly. No, they shouldn't, but they are. Rosa leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on the gentle authority she'd used when Jessica was small and needed guidance rather than lectures. The question is whether the adults in their lives are going to keep making those mistakes, or whether we're going to figure out how to do better. I'm not the one who created this situation. Aren't you? Rosa's question was gentle but pointed. I don't mean the financial crisis. That's on David and Jessica. But the way it's playing out now, with those children caught in the middle, we all have choices to make about that. Cora set her coffee cup down with careful precision, a gesture Rosa recognized as buying time to formulate a response. What did Jessica tell you? Everything, I think. The mortgage payments you've been making. The barbecue argument. David's lies about the loan modification. Your decision to stop helping. Rosa paused, choosing her words carefully. She also told me how ashamed she is, how much she wishes she could take back what she said to you. Shame isn't the same as understanding. No, it's not. But it's a start. Rosa looked around the room again, taking in the careful way Cora had created comfort within modest means. You know, I worked 3 jobs when Jessica was in college. Cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves at a grocery store on weekends, and doing alterations for a dry cleaner during the day. That must have been difficult. It was exhausting. But you know what was harder? Rosa met Cora's eyes. Watching my daughter graduate with honors and get her first real job, and hearing her tell people how proud she was that she'd made it on her own, how she'd earned everything through hard work and determination. Cora's expression shifted slightly, recognizing the parallel Rosa was drawing. She wasn't lying, Rosa continued. She did work hard. She did earn her success. But she also had a foundation she didn't acknowledge, support she took for granted because it had always been there. How did you handle it? Badly at first. I was hurt, angry that my sacrifices were invisible. I wanted credit, wanted recognition, wanted her to understand what I'd given up for her opportunities. Rosa smiled ruefully. I had some very righteous conversations with myself about ungrateful children. And then I realized that my goal had never been to create a daughter who felt indebted to me. My goal was to create a daughter who felt capable and confident and strong. If I'd succeeded so well that she felt independent, maybe that was actually what I'd been working toward all along. The observation hung between them, and Rosa could see Cora processing it, testing it against her own relationship with David and Jessica. That's very philosophical, Cora said finally. But philosophy doesn't change the fact that I've been taken for granted, dismissed, treated like my contributions don't matter. You're right. It doesn't change that. Rosa leaned back in her chair, settling in for the longer conversation she sensed they needed. But maybe the question isn't whether they've failed to appreciate you properly. Maybe the question is whether punishing them is going to get you what you actually want. And what do you think I actually want? The same thing I wanted when Jessica was dismissing my sacrifices. The same thing every parent wants. Rosa's voice was gentle but certain. You want to matter to your family. You want your love to be valued. You want to belong, not just be tolerated. Cora was quiet for a long moment, staring out the front window at the quiet neighborhood street. I've been invisible for 3 years, she said finally. Making payments, keeping quiet, letting David handle all the family dynamics while I funded them from the shadows. And when I finally tried to be more present, to have opinions about my grandchildren's lives, Jessica made it clear that I wasn't welcome. Jessica was wrong. What she said to you was cruel and unfair. Rosa's voice carried the firmness of someone who'd already had this conversation with her daughter. But she was also overwhelmed and defensive and completely unaware of the irony of what she was saying. Ignorance isn't an excuse. No, it's not, but it might be an explanation. Rosa set her own coffee cup down, leaning forward again. Cora, can I ask you something? When you decided to stop the mortgage payments, what did you hope would happen? The question seemed to surprise Cora. I hoped they would understand what my contributions actually meant to their lives. And do you think they understand now? I think they understand the financial implications. But not the emotional ones? Cora considered this, maybe not entirely. Because you've never told them about the emotional ones. You've never explained what it felt like to be supporting their family while being treated like an outsider. You've never given them the chance to change before imposing consequences. The insight was uncomfortable, and Rosa could see Cora wrestling with it. I shouldn't have to explain why I want to be treated with respect. You shouldn't have to, but maybe you do have to. Maybe that's part of the price of having relationships with imperfect people who don't always understand what we need from them. Frank Morrison's voice carried from the kitchen before Cora could respond. Rosa's right about that. Both women turned as Frank appeared in the doorway, wearing his work clothes and carrying what looked like a sandwich. Sorry to interrupt. Thought I heard voices. He nodded to Rosa. Frank Morrison, Cora's neighbor and unofficial advisor on matters of family crisis. Rosa Martinez, Jessica's mother and fellow grandmother trying to figure out how to protect children from adult stubbornness. Frank's grin suggested he appreciated Rosa's directness. Been talking to Cora about that same thing. She's got every right to be hurt and angry, but those feelings aren't going to solve the problem. Frank thinks I should just forgive and forget, Cora said, though her tone suggested this was an ongoing debate between them. I think you should decide what you want your relationship with your family to look like going forward, and then figure out how to get there. Frank settled into a chair, clearly intending to join the conversation. Right now you're focused on making them understand how they've hurt you. But understanding past hurt doesn't automatically create future happiness. Rosa nodded. That's what I was trying to say. The question isn't whether they've appreciated you properly in the past, it's whether you can build something better going forward. And what would that look like? Cora asked, though Rosa sensed she was genuinely curious now rather than just defensive. Honest communication instead of secrets. Direct requests for what you need, instead of hoping they'll figure it out. Boundaries that protect everyone's dignity. Rosa paused, thinking about her own relationship with Jessica. And probably some family counseling. Because you've all developed some pretty unhealthy patterns. Frank chuckled. Rosa, you sound like you've been through this before. Different details, same dynamics. Adult children who think they're independent but aren't. Parents who sacrifice but don't communicate. Pride that gets in the way of love. Rosa looked at Cora directly. The only difference is that my family figured out how to work through it before anyone lost their home. The reference to the foreclosure timeline brought the practical crisis back into focus. Cora's expression grew troubled as she remembered that philosophical discussions about family dynamics were a luxury they might not be able to afford. Even if we could work through the emotional issues, Cora said, there's still the practical problem. They can't afford the house without help, and I can't keep subsidizing their lifestyle indefinitely. So what would a sustainable solution look like? Rosa asked. The three of them spent the next hour discussing possibilities. David finding employment, even if it wasn't in his field. Jessica taking on additional freelance work. The family downsizing to something more affordable. Cora continuing to help but with clear agreements about repayment and family dynamics. None of the solutions were perfect, and all of them would require compromises from everyone involved. But for the first time since this crisis began, they were talking about moving forward rather than assigning blame for past mistakes. I think, Rosa said finally, that we need to get everyone in the same room. All of us, including the children if necessary. No more secrets. No more intermediaries, no more assumptions about what other people are thinking or feeling. Cora looked uncertain. I'm not sure Jessica is ready for that kind of conversation. She's ready, Rosa said, with the confidence of someone who'd raised the daughter in question. She's scared and proud and ashamed, but she's ready. The question is whether you're ready to risk hoping things can get better. As Rosa prepared to leave, Cora walked her to the door. Why did you come here today? Cora asked. Because I love my grandchildren, and I love my daughter, and I've learned that sometimes love means doing the hard thing instead of the easy thing. Rosa paused at the threshold. And because I think you and I understand each other better than our children understand either of us. Driving home, Rosa felt the cautious hope that came from recognizing a problem that might actually be solvable. The financial crisis was real, the hurt feelings were valid, and the timeline was unforgiving. But underneath all of that was a family that loved each other, even if they'd forgotten how to show it effectively. Whether they could remember how to be a family before they lost everything remained to be seen. But for the first time in weeks, Rosa thought it might be possible. Dr. Sarah Kim's office occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian house in St. Paul, the kind of place that felt deliberately designed to put people at ease. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs arranged in a circle, artwork that suggested serenity without being aggressively cheerful. Even the sound of traffic from the street below was muted, creating the sense of a space apart from the ordinary pressures of daily life. Jessica sat rigidly in her chair, her posture suggesting she was prepared for an interrogation rather than a conversation. She'd arrived 15 minutes early, as was her habit for important meetings, and had spent the time reviewing what she'd planned to say, organizing her thoughts with the same efficiency she brought to client presentations. David entered next, looking like a man walking to his execution. He'd been resistant to the idea of counseling from the moment Rosa had proposed it, arguing that they didn't have time for talking when their house was about to be foreclosed. But Jessica had overruled him with the kind of decisive authority that brooked no argument. "If we're going to save our family," she'd said, "we need to understand how we broke it first." Cora arrived precisely on time, accompanied by Rosa, who'd volunteered to drive and provide moral support. The two older women had developed an unexpected alliance over the past week, united by their shared concern for the grandchildren, and their mutual recognition that the younger generation might need help finding their way through this crisis. Frank Morrison appeared in the doorway just as Dr. Kim was preparing to begin, his presence both surprising and somehow inevitable. "Hope you don't mind the extra participant," he said, addressing the therapist directly. Cora asked if I could join, and I figured another perspective might help. Dr. Kim was a woman in her mid-40s, with the kind of calm competence that suggested she'd seen every variation of family dysfunction imaginable. She wore her graying hair in a simple style and spoke with the measured cadence of someone who'd learned the power of careful listening. "Before we begin," she said, settling into her own chair and surveying the group, "I want to establish some ground rules. This is a safe space where everyone gets to speak without interruption, where honesty is valued over politeness, and where the goal is understanding rather than winning arguments." She looked at each person in turn, making sure they understood the commitment they were making. "I also want to be clear that I can't solve your financial crisis. What I can do is help you understand the communication patterns and emotional dynamics that contributed to this situation, and hopefully give you tools for moving forward more effectively." Jessica shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable with the implication that she bore responsibility for communication failures. "I think it's important to start by acknowledging that everyone in this room loves Emma and Lucas," Dr. Kim continued. "That shared commitment to the children's well-being is going to be our foundation for everything else we discuss." Nods around the circle, the first moment of unanimity they'd shared in weeks. "Now I'd like each of you to describe, in your own words, how you understand the current situation. Not what you think other people did wrong, but how you experience what's been happening. David, would you like to start?" David looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world, but he cleared his throat and began speaking in the halting voice of someone unaccustomed to emotional vulnerability. "I lost my job 3 years ago, and I was ashamed, I guess. Scared about losing the house, about not being able to provide for my family. When my mom offered to help with the mortgage, it felt like a lifeline, but also like admitting I'd failed as a husband and father." He paused, gathering courage for the harder part. "I told Jessica that the bank had modified our loan terms because I thought it would be temporary, and I didn't want her to worry or to feel like we were charity cases. But it wasn't temporary, and the lie got bigger every month. I kept thinking I'd find work, that I could fix everything before anyone had to know how badly I'd screwed up." Dr. Kim nodded encouragingly. "How did it feel, maintaining that secret?" "Terrible. Like I was lying to everyone I loved, but also like I was protecting them from knowing how inadequate I was." David's voice cracked slightly. "I think I convinced myself that keeping the secret was noble somehow, that I was being strong by handling it alone. But really, I was just being a coward. Thank you for that honesty, David. Jessica, how do you understand what's been happening?" Jessica had been prepared for this question, but sitting in the circle with everyone's attention focused on her made her carefully rehearsed words feel inadequate. "I've been operating under completely false assumptions for 3 years, making budgets based on income that didn't exist, making decisions about our lives without understanding our actual financial situation." Her voice carried the controlled emotion of someone determined not to cry in public. "I felt proud of how well we were managing, how responsible we were being with money, how independent we were as a family." She took a shaky breath. "And I was frustrated with Cora because she seemed critical of our choices without understanding our constraints." When she'd suggest expensive activities for the children or question our financial decisions, it felt like judgment from someone who didn't understand how hard we were working to make ends meet. Dr. Kim leaned forward slightly. What was underneath that frustration, Jessica? Fear, I think. Fear that she was right, that I wasn't doing a good enough job taking care of my family. Fear that she could see something I was missing, some way I was failing that I didn't understand. Jessica's professional composure wavered. And underneath that, fear that I needed help I was too proud to ask for. So, when you told Cora she needed to contribute more, what were you really saying? Jessica was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with insights that felt too raw to speak aloud. I think I was saying, if you're going to judge how we're doing, then you need to understand what it takes to keep this family running. You need to be part of the work, not just an observer with opinions. She looked directly at Cora for the first time since entering the room. But I was also saying, I'm doing this alone, and it's hard, and I need help, but I don't know how to ask for it. Dr. Kim turned to Cora. How did you experience Jessica's words at the barbecue? Cora had been dreading this moment, the need to articulate feelings she'd spent years avoiding, but Rosa's presence gave her courage, and Frank's steady support reminded her that honesty was worth the risk. I felt dismissed, invisible. Like 3 years of sacrifice meant nothing because it wasn't the right kind of sacrifice. Her voice was steady but weighted with accumulated pain. I'd been funding their lives while feeling increasingly shut out of their decisions, their conversations, their daily reality. What did you need from them that you weren't getting? Recognition, I suppose. Not gratitude, exactly, but acknowledgement that my contributions mattered. Inclusion in conversations about the children's futures, about family decisions that I was helping make possible. Cora paused, looking at her hands. And I needed to feel like my presence was wanted, not just tolerated. So when you stopped the mortgage payments, what were you hoping would happen? I wanted them to understand what they were losing. Not just the money, but the relationship. I wanted them to realize that pushing me away meant giving up the support I'd been providing. Cora's voice grew stronger. But I also wanted to stop feeling invisible. Even if it meant conflict, at least it would be honest conflict. Dr. Kim nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Rosa and Frank. As outside observers who care about this family, what do you see? Rosa spoke first, her voice carrying the authority of experience. I see people who love each other but have forgotten how to communicate that love effectively. I see pride getting in the way of connection, and fear making everyone assume the worst about each other's motivations. Frank leaned forward, his contractor's practicality evident even in emotional discussions. I see a family that's been living with too many secrets. David's secret about his job situation, Cora's secret about the mortgage payments, Jessica's secret about how overwhelmed she's been feeling. Secrets create problems even when they're meant to protect people. Dr. Kim let the observations settle before speaking again. What I'm hearing is a family that's been operating from a place of fear rather than trust. David, you were afraid of appearing inadequate, so you hid your struggles. Jessica, you were afraid of losing independence, so you rejected help you actually needed. Cora, you were afraid of being rejected, so you gave support in ways that kept you invisible. She looked around the circle, making sure everyone was following her analysis. The result is that you've all been trying to protect each other and yourselves, but in ways that actually created more distance and misunderstanding. Jessica shifted uncomfortably. So how do we fix it? How do we build trust when we've all been lying to each other for years? Slowly, carefully, with a lot of hard conversations and probably some backsliding. Dr. Kim's tone was both realistic and hopeful. But the first step is acknowledging what each of you actually needs from this relationship, and then figuring out how to ask for those things directly rather than hoping the other people will guess. She turned to David first. What do you need from Jessica and Cora going forward? David was quiet for a moment, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of making demands. I need forgiveness, I guess. For the lies, for the cowardice, for creating this situation. And I need help figuring out how to be honest going forward, even when the truth is embarrassing or painful. Jessica, what do you need? I need to understand our real financial situation, all of it, so I can make informed decisions about our lives. I need to know that if Cora helps us, it's not going to be used against me later when we disagree about something. Jessica paused, then added more quietly, and I need help learning how to accept support without feeling like I'm failing. Cora? I need to be included in family decisions that affect children I love and support I'm providing. I need my opinions to be valued, even if they're not always followed. And I need to know that my presence in this family is wanted, not just endured. Dr. Kim made notes as each person spoke, then looked up with the kind of direct attention that suggested important information was coming. Here's what I'm observing. You all want very reasonable things from each other, but you've been trying to get those things in ways that don't work. David, you've been trying to earn forgiveness by hiding problems rather than solving them. Jessica, you've been trying to maintain independence by rejecting interdependence. Cora, you've been trying to secure inclusion by providing support in ways that guaranteed your exclusion. The analysis was uncomfortable but undeniably accurate. So our work together is going to focus on developing healthier patterns. Direct communication instead of assumption and resentment. Clear agreements about boundaries and expectations. Regular check-ins to address problems before they become crises. Rosa raised her hand tentatively. What about the practical crisis they're facing right now? The foreclosure timeline doesn't wait for family therapy to work. Dr. Kim acknowledged the urgency with a nod. You're right that this emotional work needs to happen alongside practical problem solving. But I'd argue that trying to solve the practical problems without addressing the communication issues is likely to recreate the same patterns that got you into this situation. She looked directly at Cora. That said, the family needs to know whether you're willing to resume mortgage support while you work on these relationship issues, or whether they need to find alternative housing immediately. The question everyone had been avoiding hung in the air like a challenge. Cora looked around the circle, seeing the faces of people she loved who were waiting to learn whether their family would survive this crisis. I'm willing to resume payments temporarily, she said finally, but with clear agreements about communication, about my role in family decisions, and about a long-term plan for David to contribute more substantially to household expenses. The relief in the room was palpable, but Dr. Kim held up a cautioning hand. Temporary solutions require clear definitions. How long is temporary? What specific changes need to happen for the arrangement to continue? What does success look like for everyone involved? They spent the remaining hour of the session working out practical details. Cora would resume mortgage payments for 6 months, while David intensified his job search, and Jessica explored ways to increase her income. Family meetings would happen monthly to discuss finances, children's activities, and any emerging concerns. Everyone would attend bi-weekly counseling sessions to work on communication patterns. Most importantly, there would be no more secrets. Financial information would be transparent, family decisions would involve input from all stakeholders, and problems would be addressed directly rather than allowed to fester. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Kim handed each person a sheet of paper with homework assignments. David, I want you to research and apply for at least 10 jobs per week, including positions outside your preferred field. But I also want you to have a conversation with Jessica every Sunday about how you're feeling about the process, what support you need, and any concerns you have about the family's situation. Jessica, your assignment is to schedule monthly financial reviews with Cora, where you share budget information and discuss any major expenses or decisions. I also want you to practice asking for help with at least one specific thing each week, even if it's something small. Cora, I want you to identify one family decision or activity each month where you'd like more input, and practice stating your preferences directly, rather than waiting to be asked. I also want you to schedule regular one-on-one time with Emma and Lucas that doesn't depend on their parents. Invitation. As they filed out of the office, the family looked exhausted but somehow lighter, as if naming their problems had reduced their power. The practical crisis wasn't solved. They still faced enormous challenges around employment, finances, and rebuilding trust. But for the first time in months, they had a roadmap forward that didn't require anyone to pretend their problems didn't exist. Outside, Rosa hugged her daughter with the fierce affection of someone who'd watched her child take a brave step toward growth. Misha, that was hard work. But good work. Frank clapped David on the shoulder with the kind of encouragement that came from seeing a man begin to find his backbone. You did well in there, son. Honesty's always harder before it gets easier. As they walked to their respective cars, Cora found herself walking beside Jessica. Neither woman spoke immediately, but the silence felt different than it had in months. Not comfortable, exactly, but not hostile either. Thank you, Jessica said finally, for agreeing to help us while we figure this out. Thank you for being willing to include me in figuring it out, Cora replied. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, and it wasn't the easy resolution they might have hoped for. But it was a beginning, built on honesty rather than assumption, on direct communication rather than secret resentment. Whether they could build something sustainable from this foundation remained to be seen. But as they drove home to their respective houses, each carrying homework assignments and scheduled follow-up appointments, they shared something they hadn't had in months: realistic hope that their family could survive its own imperfections. The call came during David's third interview of the week, his phone buzzing insistently against the conference table, as he tried to explain why a former aerospace engineer wanted to manage inventory for a medical supply company. I'm sorry, he told the interviewer, seeing Emma's school number on the display. It's my daughter's school. I need to take this. The voice on the other end belonged to Mrs. Rodriguez, Emma's principal, and her carefully controlled tone told David everything he needed to know before she spoke. Mr. Peterson, we need you to come pick up Emma. She's had what I can only describe as a panic attack during math class. She became convinced that numbers weren't working properly, and when her teacher tried to help, Emma became hysterical, saying that math was lying to everyone and making families break apart. David felt his stomach drop. Is she hurt? Physically, she's fine. But Mr. Peterson, she's asking for her grandmother, not you or Jessica, specifically for Mrs. Peterson. She keeps saying that Grandma Cora knows how to make numbers work right, and that if we call her, she can fix everything. The drive to school felt endless. David's hands shook as he called Jessica, who left her client meeting mid-presentation. They arrived within minutes of each other, both looking like people who'd been running toward disaster. Emma sat in the nurse's office, small and pale, clutching a tissue that had been shredded beyond usefulness. When she saw her parents, her face crumpled. I couldn't do the math problems, she whispered. The numbers kept changing, and Mrs. Henderson said they were easy, but they weren't making sense, and I kept thinking about our house numbers changing, and the bank numbers, and how numbers are supposed to stay the same but ours don't. Jessica knelt beside her daughter's chair, her professional composure completely abandoned. Sweetheart, what do you mean about house numbers changing? I heard you and Daddy talking about different house numbers. About maybe having to find a new house with a different address. And you were crying about bank numbers that were wrong, and I don't understand why grown-up numbers are different from school numbers. David felt his throat close. Their 10-year-old daughter had been carrying the weight of their financial crisis without anyone realizing it, trying to make sense of adult problems through the logic of elementary school mathematics. Emma, Jessica's voice was gentle but urgent, did you call Grandma Cora because you think she can help with numbers? Emma nodded vigorously. She was a math teacher forever and ever. She knows how to make numbers work right. And she loves us, so she would want to fix the broken numbers. The simplicity of childhood logic, that love plus expertise equals solutions, made David want to cry and laugh simultaneously. 20 minutes later, they sat in Jessica's car outside Emma's school, their daughter finally calm after Cora had talked her through basic math problems over the phone, proving that numbers still worked the way they were supposed to. She knows, Jessica said quietly. Emma knows everything, and she's trying to protect us by not asking questions, but it's making her sick. They both know, David replied, thinking of Lucas's recent behavioral changes. We've been so focused on managing this crisis that we haven't noticed our children are living it too. Jessica turned to look at him, her face streaked with mascara and exhaustion. I can't do this anymore, David. I can't keep pretending we're handling this well. I can't keep protecting my pride while our daughter has panic attacks about mathematics. What do you want to do? I want to go to your mother's house right now with Emma and Lucas and tell them the truth about everything. All of it. The job loss, the mortgage payments, the fights, the fear, everything." Jessica's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "And I want to ask Cora, not beg, not manipulate, but honestly ask, if she'll help us figure out how to be a real family instead of people pretending to be a family." That evening, they sat in Cora's living room, all of them, including Rosa and Frank, because family meetings had expanded to include everyone who truly cared about Emma and Lucas's well-being. The children listened with the serious attention of people finally being told the truth about their world. When David finished explaining about job loss and mortgage payments and adult mistakes, Emma raised her hand as if she were in class. "So Grandma Cora has been taking care of our house money, like how Mom takes care of our lunch money." "Yes, sweetheart, exactly like that." Emma considered this, then looked directly at Jessica. "And you got mad at Grandma for helping us?" The question, delivered with 10-year-old directness, silenced the room. "I got mad because I didn't know she was helping us," Jessica said finally, "and because I was scared and proud and not thinking very clearly." Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Are you going to say sorry?" "I'm going to try to do better than sorry," Jessica replied, turning to face Cora. "I'm going to try to be the kind of daughter-in-law you deserve, and the kind of mother Emma and Lucas deserve, even if it means swallowing my pride every single day." 3 months later, Cora's kitchen had become the unofficial headquarters for what Emma had dubbed Family Meeting Sundays. The modest ranch house that had once felt too quiet now buzzed with the comfortable chaos of multiple generations sharing space, opinions, and the occasional disagreement that stayed within bounds of respect. Today was Cora's 70th birthday, though she'd insisted they celebrate it like any other Sunday gathering. The kitchen table groaned under the weight of Jessica's homemade enchiladas, a recipe she'd learned from Rosa as part of her ongoing campaign to contribute something meaningful to family meals beyond store-bought desserts. The Hendricks account approved the full marketing package, Jessica announced as she served plates, including Cora in the kind of professional update that had become routine. "Which means I can increase my freelance hours, and we should be able to start those partial repayments we discussed." Cora nodded, making a note in the small journal, where she tracked family finances with the same careful attention she'd once given to lesson plans. "And David's interview on Friday?" "Second round," David replied, his voice carrying cautious optimism rather than the desperate hope that had characterized his earlier job searches. "It's not aerospace, but the project management skills transfer well, and the salary would cover about 60% of our expenses." Lucas looked up from the elaborate birthday card he was creating, with markers and enough glitter to supply a craft store. "Does that mean we get to keep our house forever?" "It means we're building a plan to keep our house," Jessica corrected gently, "with help from Grandma Cora and everyone working together." "Like a team," Emma added, unconsciously echoing the language Dr. Kim had used during their family sessions. At 11, she'd developed a sophisticated understanding of adult cooperation that sometimes startled the grown-ups around her. Frank Morrison arrived fashionably late, carrying a toolbox and the satisfied expression of someone who'd successfully installed Cora's new kitchen faucet, despite her protests that she could manage perfectly well on her own. "Birthday girl's got running water that doesn't require a wrench," he announced, accepting the plate Rosa handed him without ceremony, though she complained about letting people help her the entire time I was working. "Some things never change," Rosa laughed, settling into what had become her regular spot at the expanded table. "Some things shouldn't change." Cora replied with dignity, though her eyes sparkled with something David hadn't seen since before Harold's death: the pleasure of being gently teased by people who cared about her. The conversation flowed through updates on Emma's piano lessons, now taught by Cora twice a week, Lucas's improved behavior at school, Jessica's upcoming promotion review, and David's growing confidence in job interviews. Normal family concerns discussed with the transparency that had become their new default. When Emma presented the birthday card, a masterpiece depicting their entire extended family holding hands around a house labeled ours, Cora's composure finally cracked. "It's perfect, sweetheart." "I put everyone in it," Emma explained proudly. "Even Frank, because he fixes things when they break." As they cleaned up together, Jessica found herself working alongside Cora at the sink. A domestic partnership that would have felt awkward months ago but now carried the ease of established routine. "Thank you," Jessica said quietly, "for giving us the chance to learn how to be better." "Thank you for being willing to learn," Cora replied, handing her a clean plate to dry. It wasn't perfect. David still struggled with anxiety about his career prospects. Jessica still battled the urge to handle everything independently. Cora still had to resist the temptation to offer unsolicited advice about child-rearing decisions. But they were learning to navigate imperfection together, to address problems before they became crises, to build security on honesty rather than secrets. As the afternoon wound down and they prepared for another week of shared responsibilities and separate lives, Frank made an observation that captured something essential about their evolution. "You know what I like about Sunday dinners now? Nobody's pretending anymore. You're all just being who you are, problems and all, and somehow that's working better than when everyone was trying to be perfect." Outside, October light slanted through the windows of the small house where Cora had learned to stop being invisible, where David had found his voice, where Jessica had discovered that strength sometimes looked like accepting help. Their foundation was different now, built on acknowledged interdependence rather than hidden sacrifice, on requested help rather than silent resentment, on shared decision-making rather than protective deception. It required more maintenance than their old patterns, more conscious effort and regular attention, but it was stronger for being honest, more sustainable for being chosen rather than imposed. As they gathered their things and prepared to return to their respective homes, Emma made an announcement that surprised no one but pleased everyone. "Next Sunday, can we have family meeting at our house? I want to show Grandma Cora how I organized my room using her math teacher methods." "That sounds perfect, sweetheart," Cora replied, and meant it completely. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,